Welcome to the Right News Network.
Welcome to your World News Update. I'm Emma, bringing you today's top stories from around the globe. Tensions are escalating sharply in the Middle East as Iran launches attacks on U.S. ships and the UAE in the Strait of Hormuz, threatening global oil supplies. We're following developments from our Middle East correspondent, Layla Nazari. Layla?
Thanks, Emma. Well, what happened here is pretty significant. Iran fired cruise missiles and drones at U.S. military vessels and commercial ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday. The U.S. responded by sinking 6 Iranian boats. The UAE also reported fending off Iranian missiles and drones. This all comes as President Trump just rolled out Project Freedom, which is designed to escort merchant ships safely through that strait.
So why is Iran attacking now, especially with a ceasefire supposedly in place?
Look, Iran sees this U.S. operation as a direct challenge to what it considers its legitimate control over those waters. Tehran's basically saying, this is our backyard and you can't be operating here without our say-so. The timing is also provocative because Trump's move comes just weeks into a ceasefire deal. Iran's signaling it won't tolerate what it views as interference in its territorial domain.
Layla, appreciate the context there. Also on the world front, Iran has launched fresh missile and drone strikes against the UAE, directly threatening the region's critical energy infrastructure and global oil supplies. Air defense systems intercepted multiple incoming strikes over Dubai and Sharjah on Monday, forcing flight diversions and sending residents to shelter. Watch for whether this escalation breaks the 4-week-old ceasefire or triggers further military responses from the U.S. and its allies. Also on the world front, tensions are escalating rapidly in one of the world's most critical shipping corridors. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly a third of the world's oil trade, and now we're seeing a direct military standoff. Back to Layla Nazari with the latest. Layla, what are we hearing from Tehran?
Well, Emma, Iran just issued a pretty stark warning Monday, saying they will not allow any movement through that strait. And they're being very specific. Iranian state media is saying they'll fire on U.S. combat vessels. So this isn't just posturing. They're putting specific conditions on what they will and won't tolerate in that waterway.
How is the Trump administration responding to these Iranian threats?
Look, the U.S. is doubling down. Trump ordered the Navy to actively escort commercial ships through the strait, specifically vessels from countries that aren't involved in this conflict. The administration's position is that they're protecting neutral shipping and maintaining freedom of navigation. But here's the thing. Iran sees that as a provocation. So you've got both sides making very public statements about what they will and won't accept. And that's a recipe for miscalculation in a waterway where ships are operating really close together.
Layla, appreciate the reporting. Remaining with world affairs, tensions are exploding in the Middle East as oil prices spike to $114 a barrel. U.S. warships came under fire in the Strait of Hormuz on Monday, prompting the American military to destroy 6 Iranian boats in retaliation. Watch for more clashes ahead as the Trump administration pushes to keep critical shipping lanes open while Iran shows no signs of backing down. Continuing on world, the humanitarian toll is mounting as ceasefires collapse and militant violence claims senior government officials across 2 regions. Israeli strikes have killed at least 77 people in southern Lebanon since Thursday alone, pushing the overall death toll since March to 2,696. Meanwhile, in Mali, the military leader Assimi Goïta has taken over as defense minister after the previous minister was assassinated by al-Qaeda-linked militants and Tuareg separatists on April 25th. Tensions in the Middle East are escalating sharply tonight after Iran launched drone and missile strikes on a UAE port, shattering a fragile ceasefire and sending oil prices soaring past $115 a barrel. U.S. forces report they successfully intercepted the Iranian weapons, but the attack signals a dangerous collapse in regional restraint. Watch for further developments as both sides signal they're prepared to respond. A rare and dangerous virus is spreading aboard a luxury cruise ship stranded off the coast of West Africa, with 3 passengers already dead and others critically ill. Our World Affairs correspondent James Chen has more on this developing story. James?
Well, Emma, the MV Hondius is stuck off Cape Verde right now after what health officials believe is a Hantavirus outbreak. 3 people have died, a Dutch couple and a German national, and at least 3 others are sick. The thing is, Hantavirus is incredibly rare to see on ships like this, so it's created real panic and confusion about how this happened.
How are authorities responding to keep this contained?
Look, Cape Verde has blocked the ship from docking, which sounds protective, but it's actually made things worse, because now they can't get the 2 critically ill patients off the boat quickly. They're scrambling to evacuate them by other means. What's interesting is, cruise lines don't typically have protocols for viral outbreaks like this because it's so uncommon. So we're seeing real-time emergency management happening here.
James, thanks for the reporting on this. Still on world news, a car attack in Germany's eastern Leipzig has left 2 people dead and others hurt. Our technology correspondent Alex Park has been following developments. Alex?
Well, Emma, this happened Monday in the center of Leipzig when a driver deliberately plowed a vehicle into a crowd of pedestrians in a shopping street area. Local authorities detained a suspect right away, though they're still working to figure out what motivated this attack. We know 2 people were killed and several others injured, but we don't yet have a complete picture of the suspect's background or intentions.
Is there any indication this was a targeted attack or something more random?
Look, that's exactly what investigators are trying to determine right now. Mayor Burkhard Jung said the motive remains unclear at this stage. I mean, vehicle ramming attacks have become a real security concern across Europe over the past few years, so that's obviously going to be part of what they're looking at. But honestly, we just don't have enough information yet to say whether this was ideologically motivated, criminal, accidental, or something else entirely.
Alex Park, appreciate the reporting. Shipping pressures are mounting in one of the world's most vital trade corridors. Mediterranean Shipping Company has announced a new route to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, where regional tensions have left tankers stranded. The move signals growing concern that the U.S. Navy escort program alone may not convince companies to risk the dangerous passage. There's also big news on the AI front today. Anthropic just raised $1.5 billion in fresh funding.
That's right. Anthropic partnered with Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, and other major investors specifically targeting private equity-backed companies. They're really trying to corner the market for enterprise AI before competitors like OpenAI lock in those deals. It's getting extremely competitive in this space right now.
What does this funding race tell us about where AI is heading?
Well, I think it tells you everything. These aren't small startups anymore. We're talking Goldman Sachs and Blackstone writing huge checks because they see real revenue potential in enterprise AI. Companies that can tailor AI solutions for PE-owned firms will win big in the next few years. This isn't theoretical anymore. It's commercial reality.
Sophia Reeves, appreciate it.
Now, our in-depth analysis of the day. The story dominating the headlines, examined from every angle.
Three people are dead on a luxury cruise ship, stranded off the coast of West Africa. 2 more passengers are fighting for their lives and waiting on emergency evacuation, and Cape Verde has refused the vessel entry to port in what it's calling a public health precaution. The suspected culprit is Hantavirus, a rare rodent-borne pathogen with no approved antiviral treatment and a fatality rate that can hit nearly 40% in its most severe forms. The MV Hondius, operated by Dutch company Oceanwide Expeditions, is sitting in the Atlantic, while the world's health bureaucracies scramble to figure out what happened and what comes next. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is this a biosecurity failure? And if so, who owns it?
Thanks, Emma. Let me be blunt. Yes, this is a biosecurity failure, and the ownership lies with multiple parties who should be deeply uncomfortable right now. You have an expedition cruise operator running voyages to some of the most remote and biologically active environments on the planet, and somewhere along the line, passengers were exposed to what looks like a rodent-borne hemorrhagic virus. That doesn't happen by accident in a properly maintained, properly trained, properly equipped operating environment. Douglas Murray has written extensively about the gap between institutional confidence and institutional competence in the West, the way we build these elaborate frameworks of protocols and committees and international agreements that project authority while the actual operational capacity quietly rots underneath. That's exactly what we're seeing here. The WHO's international health regulations exist, post-COVID biosecurity frameworks exist, and we have 3 bodies and a ship that can't dock. The hard question that nobody in the mainstream press is asking is, what were the rodent control and biosecurity protocols on the MV Hondius? Were they being followed, and who was auditing them? Until we get straight answers to those questions, every grand declaration about pandemic preparedness is just noise.
But Marcus, isn't that being a little harsh? This is a rare pathogen. The CDC estimates only 150,000 to 200,000 cases globally per year. You can't design every vessel for every possible worst case. And Sophia, what's your take? Is this an industry-wide problem or an isolated operational failure?
Well, look, I think Marcus is right on the failure point, but I completely disagree with him on where to direct the scrutiny. Here's what I think Marcus is missing. The answer to a biosecurity failure in a private commercial operation is not more international regulatory bureaucracy. The answer is market accountability. Full stop. If ocean-wide expeditions cut corners on rodent control, on crew medical training, on onboard pathogen detection, that is a failure of corporate governance, and it should be met with litigation, reputational destruction, and financial consequences that make every other expedition operator in the world sit up and reassess their own protocols overnight. The expedition cruise market has grown enormously in the post-COVID period. We're talking double-digit growth in high-end adventure travel, significant investment flowing into the sector. That market will self-correct far faster and far more effectively than any new WHO framework that takes 18 months to negotiate and another 2 years to implement. The data also matters here. This is suspected Hantavirus. No confirmed laboratory diagnosis has been officially established yet. Before we redesign international biosecurity architecture, we should probably know what actually happened.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Yes, market accountability matters. I'm not arguing for more bureaucracy, I'm arguing for operational competence. Those are different things. 3 people are dead, 2 more are critically ill. The market correction Sophia is describing happens after the bodies. What I want to know is why the early warning systems, the crew medical protocols, the onboard triage capacity, the communication chain to port health authorities failed to contain this before it reached 3 fatalities. That's not a regulatory question. That's a basic operational question. And here's the thing. Cape Verde, a small island nation with limited healthcare resources, made exactly the right call blocking that vessel. That is sovereign public health authority being exercised correctly. A country protecting its population from pathogen introduction is not a logistical inconvenience. That's national sovereignty working as it should. I'd like to see more Western governments show that kind of clarity.
Here's what I want to know. In 6 months' time, does this incident change anything? Does the expedition cruise industry look different? Do health protocols look different? Or does this become another lessons learned report that nobody reads? Sophia, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, there are 2 possible trajectories, and neither is particularly clean. Either the source gets confirmed, ocean-wide expeditions faces devastating legal and reputational consequences, and the market forces every expedition operator to invest seriously in biosecurity, which is the good outcome, frankly, because it's fast and targeted. Or the cause stays murky. The regulators use the uncertainty as justification for a sweeping new compliance framework, Costs go through the roof, smaller operators exit the market, and in 5 years we have a more concentrated, less competitive expedition sector that's no safer than it was before. If current trends in post-COVID regulatory instinct continue, I'm genuinely worried it's the second scenario. Governments love a crisis. It gives them something to regulate.
Here's what concerns me most: the confirmation timeline. Everything we know right now is suspected. No confirmed diagnosis, no confirmed source, no confirmed transmission chain. What history tells us about pathogen events is that the window for effective containment is narrow, and it does not wait for bureaucratic processes to complete. If this is genuinely hantavirus, if there's a rodent infestation vector on that vessel or associated with its recent ports of call, the risk of secondary cases among passengers who've already disembarked grows every day that the source goes unidentified. The trajectory I'm watching is whether the international health machinery can move fast enough to actually answer the source question, or whether in 3 months we're talking about a cluster of cases across 3 countries traced back to a vessel that nobody was willing to act on decisively.
Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, compelling analysis, genuinely frightening implications. One thing is certain tonight. Somewhere in the maritime biosecurity establishment, someone is staring at a protocol manual they thought was sufficient and realizing it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Iran has fired cruise missiles and drones at U.S. Navy ships in the Strait of Hormuz, attacked the United Arab Emirates, and the U.S. military has responded by sinking 6 Iranian boats that attempted to interfere with Project Freedom, Trump's convoy operation to force open the world's most critical oil choke point. The ceasefire, barely a month old, appears to be collapsing in real time. Oil markets are spiking, and Beijing is reportedly playing both sides, pushing Iran to negotiate while Chinese companies continue supplying Tehran with militarily useful materials. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Has Project Freedom just handed Iran the escalation pretext it was looking for, or was confrontation always inevitable?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. Iran fired cruise missiles and drones at the United States Navy. That is an act of war by any conventional definition, and I am genuinely alarmed by the instinct in some corners to frame this as a threat to the ceasefire, as if both sides bear equal responsibility. They do not. The United States is attempting to enforce freedom of navigation through an international waterway. That is not provocation. That is the foundational condition for the global trading system. Douglas Murray has been making this point for years. When Western nations accept authoritarian regimes' framing of their own aggression as self-defense, we've already lost the narrative battle. And losing the narrative battle eventually means losing the real one. The sinking of those 6 Iranian boats was the correct response. Proportionate, legally defensible, and strategically necessary. What concerns me is what comes after, because Iran isn't doing this in isolation. Scott Bessent has explicitly said China is funding Iran, and Chinese companies are exporting materials that feed Tehran's military machine. You cannot have a serious conversation about the Strait of Hormuz without confronting Beijing's role in keeping this crisis alive.
But, Sophia, here's the counterargument. By running naval convoys through waters Iran has explicitly threatened to contest, hasn't the Trump administration essentially forced this confrontation? Some analysts would argue that diplomatic options weren't fully exhausted before Project Freedom launched. And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I actually agree with Sophia that Iran's attacks are indefensible. But here's what I think she's missing on the strategic picture. The China angle is more complicated than Bessent is letting on. Yes, Chinese companies are supplying materials to Iran. That's real and it's a problem. But Beijing is also genuinely uncomfortable with the level of instability in the Strait of Hormuz because 20% of China's own energy imports flow through it. Xi Jinping doesn't want the strait closed any more than we do. The trajectory suggests that Trump actually has more leverage over Beijing on this specific issue than the administration is currently using. Instead of publicly shaming China in press conferences, the smarter play is to use the upcoming Beijing summit to extract concrete, verifiable commitments, make China own part of the solution. The data point that matters here is that oil prices are already spiking on these attacks. That hits China's economy too. That's leverage. The risk is that we spend that leverage on headline-generating confrontation rather than on actual behavior change from Beijing.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely about the timeline we're operating on. China playing both sides isn't a negotiating posture we can politely work around. It's a strategic weapon being used against us right now. While we're waiting for summit diplomacy to produce verifiable commitments, Iran is firing cruise missiles at U.S. warships. Today. Not in 6 months. Not after the next round of talks. Today. And I'll say this plainly, the reason Iran feels emboldened to do this is because the previous 4 years of American policy convinced Tehran that the cost of aggression was manageable. You cannot appease your way to deterrence. You cannot negotiate your way to deterrence. Deterrence requires that the other side believes the cost of their next action is unacceptably high. 6 sunk boats is a start, but Iran has hundreds more. The IRGC runs swarming tactics specifically designed to absorb that kind of attrition. We need a strategy, not a series of proportionate responses.
Here's what I want to know, because this is the question that keeps every energy minister in Europe up at night. If this ceasefire collapses completely, if Iran moves to genuinely close the strait rather than just harass shipping, what it look like economically, and how does the world respond? James, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, there are really 2 plausible trajectories over the next 6 months. If Trump uses his Beijing summit to extract genuine Chinese pressure on Iran, not just a public statement, but actual material cutoffs, there's a real pathway to Iran returning to negotiations under duress. But if that summit becomes about trade optics rather than security substance, if Beijing gets concessions without delivering behavior change, then we are looking at a prolonged, low-intensity conflict that keeps oil prices elevated, strains U.S. naval resources, and gradually erodes political will in Washington for sustained engagement. And I want to be precise here. National Review's reporting that America is running low on weapons stocks is not alarmist. It's a real constraint on how long we can sustain operations on multiple fronts simultaneously.
Here's what concerns me most: the miscalculation scenario. Iran doesn't need to close the strait outright to win strategically. All they need to do is land one successful strike on a U.S. vessel with significant American casualties. The domestic political pressure that would create in Washington is enormous, and it cuts in both directions. Either we escalate to full combat operations, or political pressure forces a ceasefire that Iran once again exploits. History tells us that the path to major regional conflicts is almost always a series of manageable incidents that suddenly aren't manageable anymore. The UAE is being hit with missiles right now. That's a NATO-adjacent partner, a key regional ally. If we don't make the cost of that unbearable for Tehran, we are teaching every authoritarian in the world exactly how to bleed us out.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, genuinely important analysis on a story that is moving fast and getting more dangerous by the hour. One thing is absolutely certain tonight: someone in Tehran miscalculated if they thought America would just watch.
That's all for this update. Stay informed and stay connected. I'm Emma. We'll be back shortly.